lot happened in court, and I've got a lot of documents to talk about in the Barry Morphew case. So I just wanted to hop on here and go through some of the motions that have been filed this month and kind of talk about what's leading up to the trial, what's going to happen. We are less than 5 months, or sorry, less than 5 weeks from the trial of Barry Morphew in the missing persons case, Suzanne Morphew, in the murder investigation. So I'm going to wait till more people kind of hop on. I did try to tweet about doing this and post it on my Facebook page. I know I need to do a better job with alerting people that I'm going to be doing this. Please comment, where you're watching from, so I know that the comments are working. I will also, answer questions at the end of this video, but I first wanted to take over and look over my notes and talk about what happened in court yesterday in the Fremont County Courthouse, and then also go over some of the documents that I received from the Fremont County Court as well. Wow, someone from Iowa, hello, and Boston. Hello, Fancy Nancy, I like your name. South Mississippi, Ohio, Colorado, woo, Kentucky, Arkansas, New Mexico. Yeah, so people are just hopping on. I'm going to go over my notes in depth of what happened in court with Judge Ramsey Lama and Barry Morphew. And I'll also go over some documents that I obtained from the court that were motions filed by the defense. Those are also posted on my station's website, fox21news.com. They're in the article named "Multiple Witnesses Won't Be Able to Testify as Experts in the Morphew murder trial," is what the article is called. And I can also post the article once this video is over in the video, so people can reference some of the motions that I'm going to talk about. Okay, so let's get into it. Thank you guys so much for joining. We have almost 100 people on right now. That's awesome. All right. So please, if you have questions, ask them. I have some people behind the scenes going to copy the questions, and I'll get to them after my notes. So let's first talk about the prosecution has a new attorney on their team. His name is Grant Grossgebauer. I hope I'm saying that right. He is actually from the 18th Judicial District, which is in Arapahoe County. He's been working there since 2016. He was very engaging in courtroom. There are multiple times he would stand up. He objected to a lot of the things that the defense counsel was saying, and he was just very active and argued a lot of points to the, someone is saying I'm cutting out. Can you guys hear me now? Let me know if you have any audio issues. Anyways, so, even the judge at one point said, you're making a great argument, but this is what I have to rule because of this. And so he was complimented by the judge. And so a fresh new attorney on the prosecution side. Again, the trial is less than 5 weeks away. Jury members will start going to the courthouse on April 29th. Or April 28th, excuse me, and they'll, dwindle the number down. So the judge first denied a motion named D70, which is trying to get one of the DNA experts, Caitlin Rogers, to not be able to testify. But the judge denied this motion by the defense, saying that she will be testifying as an expert. She has had, I believe, she wrote more than 10 lab reports of the hundreds of evidence that was collected. Let me go to that motion. And in my article on Fox 21, you can read the motion itself, and in the motion, it lists evidence. I mean, there's over hundreds of evidence that they collected, but you can see specifics like they swabbed multiple beer cans and people's mouths and the seat cushion and armrest, the right side of the bed, the left side of the bed, specific steps and which steps, and the bike grips, the bike seat, the handlebars, and you can see all the different items that investigators collected for DNA. And so this is kind of the first time we're seeing this. We're even seeing that they swabbed a lot of the investigators that were first on the scene. They got their DNA. Some of the family members, some people in Indiana. So if you want to, the Camelback in Suzanne's Range Rover, they swabbed. They swabbed sunglasses. They swabbed even a used tampon. I mean, they swabbed a lot of items, and you can even go into, again, my Fox 21 article and look at this motion that was filed by the defense. Like I said, you know, she wrote up more than 10 lengthy lab reports since June 3rd of 2020, and collected over 100 pieces of physical evidence and kind of compared them to people that they swabbed for evidence. You know, the defense is saying her lab reports are confusing, and it's unclear what this, you know, DNA expert's opinions were, but again, the judge denied the motion, so Caitlin Rogers will be able to testify come the trial. So that is D70, and Rogers will testify. That was one of 4 motions that they wanted to talk about yesterday, and unfortunately, one of the other, there were actually 2 of the people that were supposed to be there were not there. One was Dr. Lisa Wolfe. She's a veterinarian. She knows a lot about the tranquilizer material, specifically BAM, which she actually has a patent for, and she also knows how it affects animals. And so, and then also Kristen Footloose, I'm going to butcher her name. Let me make sure I say it right. Foot Lucero, and she's a forensic nurse. She was not present as well yesterday, and her testimony is not going to be heard until April 29th, which is another motions hearing. And that's actually the day after some of the jury members will be called to Fremont County. But I do have all 4 of the motions for these witnesses to be striked by the defense, again on fox21news.com, so you can read that. Again, these motions by the defense it's an effort to rule out these people from the trial to be expert witnesses, if that makes sense. So Iris Eaton, she first takes the stand. One of the first things she says is, you know, I want to make it clear that this is not a no body homicide case. This is actually a missing persons case. And, you know, again, she wanted 4 witnesses to testify yesterday, 2 of which were not present, 2 of which the prosecution said they had prior engagements. Dr. Wolfe had a conflict with Department of Wildlife that she couldn't get out of, and then Kristen Foot Lucero also had a conference that she could not get out of, a prior engagement, so that's why she was not there either. So they first talk about, you know, are they going to reschedule this Shrek hearing? And they just said they decided that Foot Lucero, the nurse, will, and she looked at photographs of Barry Morphew's scratches on his arms and his hands taken a couple weeks or a couple days after, Suzanne was reported missing. And they're just photographs. She didn't get to examine Barry Morphew. And the defense is saying, like, how could she, let me get to the, yeah. So, the prosecution wants her to testify about conclusions she reached and speculation she engaged in after viewing photographs of Morphew's arms and hands, and what could have happened or what would have caused these scratches and about what time these scratches first happened. And the defense is saying, how could you do this with not even examining the person? You don't know the patient's history. You can't, this witness doesn't have an apparent expertise in blindly diagnosing injuries from photographs. This is pure speculation on the cause of the alleged injuries and the time frame of when they may have appeared. Without a patient examination and patient history, how could you make a medical determination about how this person got these scratches and when they got these scratches? And the defense is saying, the jurors could do just that by just looking at a photograph and not hearing about this testimony from this nurse who also looked at the photographs, that they could make their own and draw their own conclusion, is what the defense is saying. And this nurse is also certified in, it's called SANE, which is Sex Assault Nurse Examiner. So the defense is saying under no circumstances should the prosecution be permitted to identify her as a sex assault examiner or go into anything concerning sex assault cases. That is inflammatory material that has no place in the case. So they're pretty much saying, this witness would be prejudice and it wouldn't, and it's very speculative, and the jurors could look at the photos and make their own and draw their own conclusion, is kind of what the defense is saying. So the judge did not make a ruling on whether or not this nurse, Christine Foot Lucero, will testify as an expert. That decision will come on April 29th, in a motions hearing set for that date, which is very, very close to when the trial will begin. And the prosecution believed that Shrek hearing would be really quick. It wouldn't take long at all. But again, Barry Morphew will have to appear in person for that. Okay. Oops, I dropped all my papers. Okay. So now they talked about Dr. Lisa Wolfe, who is a veterinarian, and she what was mentioned a lot in the preliminary hearing about her experience with tranquilizer material and how it affects animals. And the prosecution is kind of saying, it's imperative that she testify as an expert because, she knows the weight of an animal and how the certain tranquilizer material will affect that person or affect that animal, and she can compare it to a human. But again, there's been no studies of tranquilizer material affecting humans, and how that affects humans is what the defense is saying. The prosecution they talked a lot about the materials inside the dryer and what clothes and what what pieces of articles of clothing was in there, and There was sheets and things like that. And the prosecution was trying to say, there were these shorts that belonged to Barry Morphew that were in the dryer, and those contents were taken out, and they didn't find until 7 days later that there was this tranquilizer needle sheath cap in the bottom of the dryer. And prosecution is trying to say, the connection and draw a connection that it could have fallen out of Barry Morphew's shorts that he was wearing the day before Suzanne was reported missing. And the defense is saying, well, hold off. Barry Morphew has multiple pairs of shorts that are very similar, and he even had pairs of shorts that were very, very similar to the ones that were found in the dryer found in his truck. So how can you conclude that the ones he was wearing on May 9th were in fact the ones that were in the dryer? So they talked about a lot of the material in the dryer where that needle sheath cap was found. So they took photos of the dryer contents on May 13th, and the needle sheath cap wasn't found until May 19th, so a couple days later. And it was just found laying on the bottom. And remember in the preliminary hearing, the defense tried to say, how do you not know that this was placed in the dryer by one of the deputies? And again, the prosecution was, adamant about it was laying there. They photographed it before they took it out and everything like that. Again, DNA, they brought up DNA about the needle sheath cap. And again, Barry Morphew's DNA is excluded from the needle sheath cap. Suzanne's, I believe it was one of the daughters and Alex Walker's DNA was found on the needle sheath cap that was found in the dryer. And the prosecution is connecting that this, needle sheath cap that was found in the dryer has to be connected to Suzanne's disappearance. It's out of place. It's, there was tranquilizer material that was missing. Barry Morphew even admitted that he used tranquilizer material recently, but there wasn't any in the house, and that he admitted that he had thrown some material away in one of the 5 trash bins or trash runs that he made on the way to Broomfield the day Suzanne was reported missing. So that's kind of why this testimony from a veterinarian that has a lot of experience with tranquilizer material and how it affects people and how it affects, animals is really important, so that the jurors can draw a conclusion as to what might have happened if something happened at all. But the judge and the defense is saying, well, we don't have a toxicology report because we don't have a body. So how can you infer that Suzanne even had tranquilizer material in her? So Judge Lama pretty much said that it is too speculative to allow the prosecution to proceed only on a theory that a tranquilizer was used on Suzanne Morphew. It's like saying that, there's a knife in the kitchen, and so the murder weapon must have been a knife. Or there's a gun in a gun safe, and so it had to have been the gun for the murder weapon. So that's kind of what they're saying is, although, yes, there was, a tranquilizer needle sheath cap found in the dryer, it's too speculative to say that's what caused her demise, if that makes sense. But the judge did clarify that although, this witness cannot testify as an expert, the veterinarian, she can still testify, she just can't be an expert, and that the evidence of a needle sheath cap, it still can be permitted in the trial. So it's not like the judge is getting the needle sheath cap taken out of the whole case. And he wanted to clarify that as well. Oh, and the judge even pointed out, like, with Barry's DNA not being on the needle sheath cap, like, he even said, doesn't that hurt your theory? And the prosecutor said, no, not necessarily. It's a nature of DNA. So this comes again with how important it is to have that DNA expert take the stand. It is interesting that, when we've been hearing in the preliminary hearing, the defense, has been talking about this CODIS match and, how these CODIS matches could be hitting or could be connected to a sexual assault person who's in multiple different states and stuff. They're trying to strike the main DNA expert from testifying and it's interesting because many of the defense's previous assertions, like in the preliminary hearing and other hearings, was that the CODIS DNA information was highly relevant and exculpatory, of their client or to their client. And so it's interesting that they're trying to, or they did try, that they did try to get this DNA expert, Caitlin Rogers, to be striked from testifying. But again, the judge ruled we need to hear from her. So, let me see if I have anything. They talked a little bit about this veterinarian's history with, BAM, which is tranquilizer material. I guess it's the serum, and that she even has a patent on it. One of the things that the defense brought up was that the BAM had been expired, and I guess the prescription was from 2 years ago. And how does that play into, having that into an animal or having that into a human? That was the first time I had heard that the tranquilizer material had been expired. Again, there's no study on the use of BAM, which is tranquilizer material, on humans. How her use of tranquilizer on a human versus animal, there's not been a study of that. Yeah, Iris Eaton, Barry Morphew's attorney, claims the prosecution is using this needle sheath cap as a leap that Suzanne is dead from tranquilizer missing rather than just missing. She talked a little bit about how the tranquilizer gun that they found is actually operable if you use duct tape on the pen. But it's not operable with how it was found in the safe, in the gun safe in the garage. Again, Iris Eaton says that there was no syringes in the safe or on the property. There was only one syringe found with needle, but not tested. DNA tested is what she was claiming. And then prosecutor Holbert for the states, went up there and said, this isn't speculation by speculation. This is reasonable inference. There was no blood found in the house, but Barry Morphew admitted he had BAM, which is the tranquilizer material, and had used it recently on deer because there was no BAM found in the home because it had been used on Suzanne Morphew, is what the prosecutor Holbert said. And he said this goes toward weight. What defense says goes... Sorry, it's hard to read my own writing when I'm writing so fast. What defense says goes way beyond Brooks, which is a legal term. It would be very helpful, I think. An animal of a certain weight, similar to humans and how they act. An animal could be killed by BAM, then a human could be too, is what the prosecutor said. Okay. I'm just reading over all of my notes from when they were talking about Dr. Wolfe, who is a veterinarian and has a lot of experience with tranquilizers. The judge pretty much said there's not enough evidence to tie tranquilizer material to this case. It would be easier if there was a toxicology report. So the judge and the court is excluding testimony of Wolfe as an expert, but there still can be, he's not eliminating, or the court's not eliminating the sheath itself, just that Dr. Wolfe cannot testify as an expert. So now it's Mr. Spence's turn, and he is a canine handler. And let me go to my notes. Okay, so he's a canine handler, and there was a lot of back and forth, and we had to have a break in between because at one point, at the very beginning, before they even brought Mr. Spencer, Doug Spence, into the courtroom, the defense is saying that, just a few days ago over the weekend, they talked to Mr. Spence and he claimed that there was a report that he wrote, but they don't have a copy of it and it wasn't produced to them in discovery. And then the prosecution has said, no, he never mentioned a report and we don't have that in discovery. If we had that, we would have produced it. And even the prosecutor, the new prosecutor, Grant Groscover, I'm butchering his name, but from Arapahoe County, he said, I even chastised him, about this one report from a deputy, that's how he prepared Mr. Spencer for this hearing, was that they went over a deputy that was with him the night Suzanne was reported missing with the canine, and they were going over this deputy's report about what his canine and what the canine handler said happened, and he said, this would have been a lot easier if you had only wrote your own report. And so he chastised him about it. And again, Mr. Spence never even said, wait, I do have my own report, you just never asked, is kind of what the prosecutors. So they kind of took a break. They went out in the hallway, and it was yesterday that the prosecution first learned that this canine handler actually did, in fact, write a report, but never told anyone that he wrote a report and didn't hand it over. So then, therefore, it wasn't produced in discovery, and so the defense didn't have it, nor the prosecution had it. And the judge, said pretty much, yeah, it didn't seem like you guys did this intentionally, didn't produce this report from this canine handler, but with Rule 16, you have to hand over all evidence, and it was your responsibility to ask people who were involved in this investigation to hand over any material, and you didn't. So I'm gonna have to, this is another discovery violation. So Mr. Spence did testify yesterday since he was there, and so I can go over kind of what he said on the stand as far as he and his canine. They were only called out for the very first day that Suzanne Morphew went missing. So that was May 10th, and they arrived, I think, around 9:30. They first talked about the background of the canine. The dog's name is, I thought I had it. I think it's Roscoe. Yeah, Roscoe. And it's from the Department of Corrections, and it is in Buena Vista. And they were called in just for that one day. And before he went on to testify on the stand, the prosecution says, we're not going to use him during the trial. We're going to strike his own testimony, just so everyone knows that the motion filed by the defense, the prosecution was like, yep, I am just going to strike him as a witness. But they had him testify, and, you know, the prosecution said it wasn't easy for them to get information from Spence. We didn't know about the reports, but they didn't ask for the report. They didn't ask if he had a report. And he said, I do have a report. It was never requested by law enforcement. Prosecution didn't have it. First time he is telling everyone about this report. It's on his personal computer at his office. So only him and his supervisor, I believe, has access to the report. He described the report being a paragraph or so, very short. And like while he is describing, he just reports from his memory. It's not like he's out there with a pen and paper as the dog is sniffing. Again, this canine is a trailing dog. It's not a cadaver dog. That's very different. So this canine took a shirt of Suzanne's, sniffed it, and then started trying to search in the area where the bike was found to see if, you know, there was any scent of Suzanne further away from where the bike was. And Mr. Spence on the stand just said, you know, they never found, there's no scent found of Suzanne. They circled around the creek. They went 50 to 70 yards down the creek near where the bike was found off of County Road 225 and Highway 50. It was, again, really dark. He described that the creek was overflowing. You know, at one point it seemed like the dog, Roscoe wanted to go over on the other side. They took the dog over to the other side. Still no alertion, or the dog did not alert to, smelling anything of Suzanne's, or, you know, alerting the canine handler of anything important. He said the Roscoe didn't commit either way. And we also saw body cam video of this going on when first Roscoe gets on scene, and when they're talking to investigators. And, you know, it is interesting that I see Alex Walker in the video, on the body cam video, and then I also see George Davis, which is one of Barry Morphew's close friends from Salida, who was one of the first civilians on the scene. And one of the investigators was like, who is that? And one of the people in the video said, you know, that's one of the family friend, and he's also a firefighter, a volunteer firefighter. The judge was pretty upset that the report had been on this, you know, canine handler's computer for 2 years, and it wasn't produced, not to the prosecution nor to the defense. And the judge, you know, still thinks it's relative, thinks it's still important. And so he did rule that Mr. Spence has to provide it to the prosecution, which they determined it would be Alex Walker that, you know, would get this from Mr. Spence, and then they would immediately supposed to hand it over to defense, I believe, by the end of this week. So the deputy that was with the canine handler was William Plachner, and he wrote up a report. They posted the report on the screens in the courtroom, and they kind of went line by line with the canine handler, wanting to make sure what was in the deputy's report was accurate with what, you know, Mr. Spence and his canine, what happened that day. And there were a couple of things that were inaccurate, and so they went through that. And again, the prosecution, when they talked to Mr. Spence, you know, a couple days prior to this hearing yesterday, you know, the prosecutor said, you know, it's better that we have our own reports so that you don't have to go through someone else's report and, you know, say whether or not what they said was accurate or not to what happened that day. Roscoe is almost 4 years old, the canine. From what I could see in the video, it was again dark, but it looked like to me it was a bloodhound. It's not specifically used for dog trailing. He does it on the side. So Mr. Smith says that he doesn't always do this type of thing. But when he does, he always writes a report whenever the dog goes out with him. And he described how he has gone through big bodies of water like the Arkansas River. He's done little creeks. He's, you know, gone through barbed wire with this dog. So Roscoe, you know, he is not afraid if they're connected to a scent, or if they're onto a scent that could be connected to, let's say, a missing prisoner, that they will continue on no matter if they have to go through a large body of water or not. Again, this, you know, Doug Spence, he writes his reports based wholly on memory, and that was the first time Roscoe had been in that area and had gone through that creek, which it's not that deep. You know, this Doug Spence even mentioned that, you know, this dog has gone through the Arkansas River, which was a lot deeper, to, you know, be following a scent. They said that they arrived around 9:30 that night, saw that the bike was taken out, talked with the officers about what was going on, and asked, you know, for a scent article, which they gave them a Suzanne's shirt. This is when I started noticing that Barry Morphew and even his daughters that were sitting behind him were starting to react more in court. Now that, you know, COVID, things have been lifted, we don't have to wear masks anymore. And so I was noticing that he was reacting, and so was the girls, to some of the things that this canine handler was saying. And one of the things was, you know, the prosecutor, the defense counsel was asking the canine, you know, so take me through what, you know, how you took Roscoe and where all you went and what happened. And so he's describing what happened with Roscoe, and, you know, she starts saying like, oh, so the dog was alerting to something near the creek. And he goes, I wouldn't say alerting, searching for the odor near the creek. And he described that the creek was flooded, and, you know, the defense counsel's asking, you know, well, how long did, you know, the dog, you know, pull you down the creek? And he said 50 to 70 yards. Don't know exactly how long it was, but because it was dark, but it was something between 50 to 70 yards. It circled around him. But again, Doug Spence said there's no scent found. Roscoe didn't commit either way to one side of the river or not. He described how sometimes if this dog, you know, sniffs a piece of article of clothing and it's a windy day, the scent could be carried through the wind, and that might have been, you know, why the dog, you know, went down the creek 50 to 70 yards. But again, the dog never alerted to finding a scent of Suzanne. Again, when he said this, Doug Spence said he wasn't really alerting, he was searching. So the defense counsel is really saying like, oh, so he was alerting, and Spence is kind of getting frustrated, and he said no, he was really just searching. And this is when I'm starting to notice Barry Morphew and the daughters starting to have more reaction to what Doug Spence is saying on the stand. And again, the Spence says, no alerting, he kept sniffing toward the other side of the river and says, defense is saying, so he was alerting to something that was on the other side of the river. Again, Doug Spence says, no, not alerting. And again, Barry Morphew starts chuckling kind of under his breath. The Little Arkansas River is what the creek is called, but the defense counsel kept calling it the Arkansas River, and so that had to be clarified. He mentioned that he'd never been through this area, or the creek, before. They did conduct a grid search in that area. They did search the other side of the creek, where his nose was in the air. And again, no scent was found. He described that when the dog first started trekking down the creek, that he was tearing me through the barbed wire. He's having to jump over barbed wire. He was getting hit by branches. He lost his cell phone. He described that once Spence gave the dog the odor from the article, he didn't give me any negatives till we got to this log that was in the creek. His head was down, started tracking the scent. Once he got to the bottom, he didn't have a scent. He wasn't pulling as hard as he does before the tree or the log. His head came up and he started searching around the tree. No negatives means he's trailing. In theory, her shirt, Barry Morphew's shaking his head again, didn't go across the river until the early hours of May 11th. And because there was a debrief with law enforcement. But later on through body cam video, they realized it was actually 10 p.m. and he thought it was a lot later than it was, because he did go over to the other side of the creek. They keep saying river, but it's the creek. Then we're shown body cam video of one of the deputies talking to Barry Morphew and kind of explaining what this canine and the canine handler is doing. And the first thing that comes out of Barry Morphew's mouth is, did the dog get a scent up the river? ? And then the deputy said, did not get a scent and went towards the river and could be getting the scent from the other side of the river. It's an air scent, not ground scent, is what the deputy is explaining to Barry. Then it shows on the body cam video at 10:14 p.m. that they were on the other side of the river. There was a crime scene on the other side of the river, which I don't think it was really a crime scene. It was more of a grid search. Again, this canine is, Roscoe is a trail dog, not a cadaver dog. We were doing an area search of Suzanne for any odors. Roscoe didn't alert to anything on the other side either. Again, in the final clip that they showed of the body cam video, this deputy is explaining to Barry Morphew and a couple of his friends that were nearby that they waited a while to get this canine handler to come out there, and that's what they were doing around 10:15, was taking the canine around to smell for Suzanne, or scent. This canine handler said that he didn't fully agree with this deputy's report and that there was some hearsay for him. And the canine handler kind of explained that, if he was tracking Suzanne, he would have gone into the river, or into the water, excuse me. Off his reaction, he wasn't attracted to the creek, so he's saying that he didn't have a track on Suzanne's scent. The dog was following a scent trail near the river and not tracking like what was said in the report. So they're like talking about minute things that were written in the report by a deputy that was also near the canine, if that makes sense. Yeah, they searched the right bank of the South Fork from County Road 225 going downstream. Dog did not alert to any scent. March 25th, defense calls Spence to, and he said he had, this is when the defense calls Spence, is March 25th, and he said he had conducted a report, and whenever Roscoe is sent out, he does, but he never gave it to prosecutions because they never asked. He did hang up on the defense when he was talking to the defense attorneys on the phone. He says with his job, they have representations before describing information and what they do. So that's why he said he wanted to end the phone call. When the scent was laid down by the dog, the air could have carried the scent down the creek. The last sentence of the report was false, he said. If there had been a scent near the Morphew home, Roscoe could have crossed the creek. And then the prosecutor, Grant, said, I was chastising you about not writing your own report, but you never mentioned you had your own report. Spence is not law enforcement. He, works for the Department of Corrections as a lieutenant. He gets paid by a DOC, which is the state. So this is when the prosecution is saying, we thought it was just hand over all law enforcement documentation, and the judge was like, again, no, you have to hand over any documentation, anything, any reports in this investigation. And so that's why he got dinged, or the prosecution got dinged for, discovery violations. So then the prosecution's asking this Spence, do you typically write up reports? Are you asked to produce these reports to anyone, or do you just keep this for yourself? He doesn't usually hand over reports. Were you supposed to write or send us a report? He said he didn't know that he was supposed to. Spence, the canine handler, said the dog was never on to finding Suzanne or the scent of Suzanne, saying when the canine was searching the area, there was no scent of Suzanne, is what Spence was trying to get at. Then they talked about the wind patterns that day and how, had there been, the wind was going south to north, which is actually towards Highway 50 rather than the Morphew home, which in this report, the deputy kind of alluded to that. This canine handler says it is important to know the wind direction and speed when I do take out my canine. He didn't record it that day or check it, and it's not in his report either. He was asked if he reviewed his own report before coming to the hearing, and he did not. He said because of the ravine from Highway 50, there could have been a breeze, but doesn't remember that, though. Again, the defense is still wanting the report from Spence, and so the prosecution will have to get that report and hand it over to them, I believe, by the end of this week. The defense is claiming that prosecution is producing fictitious theories from, not collecting all these reports like they should. Okay. I think that's all my notes. I left around 1 o'clock, and the court hearing yesterday ended at 2, so I did miss the last hour. But I had some people in the courtroom in there for me. Again, the defense tried to persuade the judge to dismiss the case for, again, a pattern of violations by not handing over reports like the one from this canine handler. And multiple motions that were filed that you can find on fox21news.com. The defense filed to strike expert testimony, many expert testimony, but also reminded the courts of Morphew's rights, including the right to remain silent and the right to appeal. Right now, the prosecution says this, the striking Dr. Lisa Wolfe, the veterinarian, as well as the canine handler from being expert witnesses, that's 12 out of 14 expert witnesses that have, will not be able to testify as experts at the trial. They can still testify in the scope of their profession, just not offer expert opinions, if that makes sense. Only, the strict facts of what they did. Again, Judge Lama is making notes of all the different times that they're not handing over, the prosecution is not handing over discovery and reports, and it's become a pattern, and the judge is making note of that. Okay. Yeah, so the defense has asked for sanctions like a dismissal of the case, for the prosecution to pay for court proceedings and, work that they had done to prepare for yesterday's hearing. But again, the judge has denied both of those pleas or both of those sanctions, and he has not made a decision on whether or not he is going to dismiss the case. Oh, or he did say that it would be it wouldn't, that he wouldn't dismiss, I believe. Let me look back at my notes. The judge did make a note that, this wasn't an intentional mistake by the prosecution, because they didn't know that the report was even existed. So in the motion for the DNA expert Caitlin Rogers to be striked from testifying, you can see the list of a lot of the evidence that she collected, that she tested against DNA from, people that were close to the case. And we don't know when those items were collected, and we don't know where they were picked up from. So you have to take that into consideration when you look at the list of evidence items. Okay, let's get to questions. And hopefully I can clarify some things with questions, or with answers to questions. Okay. Someone's asking if the girls cried. No, they did not cry yesterday, but they have in the past. Yeah, so how did they get a discovery violation for discovery they didn't even know existed? So in Rule 16, it states that any and all evidence, like any and all reports, any and all communication in regards to this case, have to be handed over. So it's the prosecution's duty, pretty much, to ask everyone that was involved in the case if they took notes to produce it, or if they took reports to produce it. And so they're just saying, the judge is saying, yeah, it sucks that you didn't, know that this report existed, but you should have asked, kind of a thing. Someone's asking if Barry's wounds were scabbed over. Yes, I believe that's what it said in the arrest affidavit. Someone's asking what was Barry's reaction not being dismissed. I think it was KRDO's reporter. You can see in the video for yourself. I'll let you guys go look at that. People are asking any other reactions you remember from them. I mean, you can just see from video of people, of Barry Morphew and the daughters going into the court and coming out, just their different demeanor when they're going in and when they're coming out. Again, Barry Morphew, he has maintained his innocence since day one, since Suzanne first disappeared. And, you know, he will be back in court on the 19th of April, and then he'll be back at court again the 29th, and then that's it. So pretrial hearing, or pretrial conference hearing is April 19th. A motions hearing is April 29th. And then the trial begins. And so there's not much left until the trial. So it's interesting that we've come to this point. I didn't think, I thought it would, you know, take longer. Yeah, someone's saying, please clarify river and creek. So the defense counsel kept questioning Spence, the canine handler, about a river, the Little Arkansas River, which is really the creek behind the Morphew home, in between where the bike was found and where the Ritters live and where the Morphews live, if that makes sense. And it's really a creek. I walked, I think, one time across it, didn't even get my shoes wet. According to this canine handler, it was flooding, and so it was a lot deeper than it typically is. But again, this was around May when snow's melting, and so that's probably why it was flooding. Someone is asking, I thought it was bike shorts that they collected from the closet for the dogs to use. I believe, Deborah Chase, that you were correct on that. So they might have collected more than just that one item for the dogs to sniff. But I believe you were correct that it was bike shorts that they first collected. But in court on Wednesday, they said it was a shirt that the dog sniffed. Someone's asking if they ever took cadaver dogs out there, or if was it just the trailing dog. That's a great question. So according to the arrest affidavit, there are cadaver dogs mentioned, and we have not heard from those cadaver dog handlers yet. I obviously believe that we're going to hear from them during the trial. Some of those cadaver dogs actually made alerts, 3 different cadaver dogs made alerts to the bobcat, as well as the trailer that was parked next to the bobcat that was parked in the driveway of the Morphew home. But we haven't heard much about, you know, what happened as far as how they were alerted. They were just taken 3 separate times on their own separate accords, and went around the trailer as well as the bobcat. And I believe one of the dogs even jumped up onto the seat of the bobcat and alerted its canine handler about that bobcat, I guess you could say. But we haven't heard much about from the cadaver dog handlers. Someone saying, is this Foose's Creek? I believe the Little Arkansas River is the same as the Foose's Creek. But if you're from Salida and that's wrong, please tell me. Any other questions about the tranquilizer material and if that's going to be introduced, or any questions at all about kind of what's to come in the next month or so until we get to trial, how that's going to play out? Thank you so much for subscribing, Infamous Truth Teller. Yeah, so if you missed earlier, once this video stops, you can play it back and watch the beginning if you missed it. Someone's asking, so what's next? So next is the pretrial conference hearing. I do believe that there were some motions filed about the jurors and protecting jurors, and those have been suppressed, meaning that I cannot see them. Yeah, protection orders concerned about prospective jurors, so they have suppressed some of the motions that just were filed last week. So the next pretrial conference, they're just going to talk about kind of jurors and the questionnaires that the jurors are going to receive, what potential jurors the defense wants and what potential jurors the prosecutions wants and what they don't want for both sides. And then there's going to also be that motions hearing on the 29th of April, going over a couple of last minute motions that were filed. One was to strike the nurse that checked out the photos of Barry Morphew's arm. I'm losing everyone. Sorry. Someone asked if George Davis was going to be a witness, and I believe he was on the witness list. And I found out that I don't think he works for the fire department anymore, and I believe he moved from the home he was living in Maysville area, which is near Salida. Yeah, so I'm not sure if, obviously during jury selection, the media should not be present. We cannot show video at all of any potential jurors. So we really will obviously get notified as far as when, opening statements will be. And so that's when we'll be able to go to court and report. But as of right now, we're still not allowed to have our computers. So I am taking notes on a trusty notepad. And hopefully by then, maybe the judge will reconsider and we can live tweet, or we can at least have our computers, which makes our lives a lot easier when it comes to reporting. Someone's asking how did George Davis get notified about being on scene? I believe when I talked to George Davis, he said he had his a scanner, or one of his buddies from the fire department kind of called him up and told him. And so that's why, since he was already in town, he went ahead and went to that area to try to help out as much as he could. Will the shirt be introduced as evidence? Yeah, the shirt will be introduced as evidence. Any other questions? I will take, let's say, 5 or 4 more questions. Someone's asking if Nancy Grace contacted me and if I was going to be on a podcast. I have talked to Nancy Grace, but I'm not set to be on any podcast at all. She was apparently on Profiling Evil. Who was on Profiling Evil? Oh, are they talking about Linda Stanley, the district attorney? Someone's asking if the trial will be televised. I highly, highly doubt it. Obviously, the media, we're gonna request it to be, but it can easily be denied. It would be a lot easier. I think it would allow for more people to be sitting into the courtroom, because we could all stream it and we could just report from our newsroom and watch the live feed if that was the case. But I don't think that's gonna happen. Yes. Was forensics taken from Mallory's bed? Yes. Multiple swabs. If you go and look at that Fox 21 news article that I just posted yesterday, you can see in one of the motions that they swabbed the sheets. So A new deputy district attorney has been appointed to this case, or they were asked to be a part of this case. He's from the Arapahoe County area, 18th Judicial District. Again, Chaffee County, Fremont County is in the 11th Judicial District. So they did bring over someone from another judicial district to help them out. And what I could see from yesterday, he was, on top of it. He objected to a lot of things. He was standing up a lot of the time. He was he did very well, and even in fact the judge said, you argued your point very well. So he was even complimented by the judge. And people are asking if Drew Nielsen was in court. Drew Nielsen was not in court. I haven't seen her really since maybe 1 or 2 hearings since the preliminary hearing. The district attorney, Linda Stanley, I haven't seen since the preliminary hearings. She wasn't in court yesterday either. All right, guys, I think that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate if you guys subscribe. I will do a better job as it gets closer and closer to do more updates as, court proceedings happen. And please, if you have more questions and I didn't get to them, please send me a message. Either send me an email at ls as in Sam, charf as in Frank at kxrm as in Mary.com, or you can send me a Facebook message, a Twitter message, and I can answer your questions as best I can. Again, Suzanne Morphew is missing. Her body has not been found, and keep her top of mind for these next couple of months as the prosecution as well as the defense prepare for this trial. So again, thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.